All right, sitting here with Adam Rose, back from a little conversation here, Rocky Mountain Adventure Racing. Thanks. Super excited to welcome everybody and to introduce Adam. Adam is in Wales. It's 8 p.m. He's getting ready for bed probably in a couple hours, but quite a time difference here. Thanks for spending the time with us, Adam. We chatted a little bit. We are creating an adventure racing community in and around Alberta, and there is some communities that exist already. Some folks that are following along with us may not know who you are. So you are an adventure racer, an expedition length adventure racer, somebody who's raced internationally. What else am I missing? What can you tell us?
I'm a jack of all trades. I've done a lot of things. I mean, it was kind of interesting. Chris, thanks for inviting me along. I'll say this much for people who haven't met me before. I've worked for sleepmonsters.com, which is one of the best adventure racing kind of news sites, the oldest probably actually in the world. Is what I bring to the table is not that I'm the most experienced adventure racer or the best, or I stand on the podium. But I've just noticed, because you kind of look at, whoa, I've ended up somewhere, is that having racer since 2009, so we're talking 12 years now or so, whatever, it's going 13 years, but also being a race reporter has given me a different perspective. Because it's one thing, I mean, I've interviewed the best teams in the world, so it's one thing to be competing, but it's another thing to get the opportunity to and study. Whatever I say, take it with a pinch of salt, test it out, all that kind of stuff, But it is my perspective. That's all I'll say, and it is an interesting perspective. It's afforded me an interesting perspective. Yeah. So I'm very passionate about the sport, as I can see, Chris. I can see you are too. And I love to get people into this sport. I think it's the greatest sport in the world. I've been doing outdoor stuff of different kinds for donkey's years, but this for me is the pinnacle. And people tell me to shut up about it. He's going off about it. But the more
that's all good. How do you probably heard the joke before, but how do you know there's an adventure racer at a party?
Yeah, they'll tell you about it.
Don't worry, they'll make sure they let you know.
Yeah, for sure, for good reason.
Absolutely. So Adam you have a YouTube presence as well that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. AR on AR, so Adam Rose on Adventure Racing. So any of our viewers or any of our community that's looking for some more educational opportunities around adventure racing beyond this type of interaction, we definitely encourage them to go there and check it out. How did that get started for you? And is any nuances or things you want to share with people that are listening or watching today?
Yeah, I mean, it was just a natural progression from, building a small community of adventure racers. And the reason I did that was not only because I was passionate about the sport, but I needed teammates. Yeah. So I need to race with people. So where I used to be living outside London, together with a whole bunch of people, we just like-minded people, got people into the sport. I've been involved, as I've said to other people, I've been involved with kind of video and TV, film production for a very long time. And so it's just like, well, I know how to do that stuff. And my day job is about helping people in my professional career. So to do it on adventure racing, just a natural fit. And just coming back to what I said, the channel is exactly that. It's my take on adventure racing. So yeah.
It's great, and it's incredibly vast in terms of people looking for answers. There's a lot of information there, a lot of experience, a lot of perspectives that you share, and you're right. It it's one perspective, but that's how we learn. And I think it's a very, and I think I speak on behalf of the broader community too, it's a very educated perspective. So
Thank you.
it's great. The other thing to mention too for folks is that I think it was last week you had talked to Randy Erickson, legendary Randy Erickson's on his podcast. So certainly encourage folks to head over and check out that podcast as well. Now, I reached out to Adam here because as many people know, Rocky Mountain Adventure Racing is hosting a virtual race. Though it's not virtual, you actually have to go out and do it and physically participate. But we were hosting a race based on concepts that you had actually also shared around the same time that we've been, promoting our race, and that is basically using checkpoints that are in the natural world already, fixed checkpoints, somewhat invisible to the general public, but you can actually create a course and transitions in a natural wilderness area, in an urban environment if necessary. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? And then I'll tell you a little bit more about the race as well.
Yeah. The reason I did this was, as I explained, there's an episode on AR and AR all about this, but it's pretty difficult to stage an adventure race. Most race directors would say there's not an adventure racing. The people who do it because they're passionate, not because they think they can make a huge amount of money. I mean, so much so that when Amazon hosted the Eco Challenge in Fiji, there was the most expensive reality series they'd ever done, and they pulled out afterwards saying never again, as in it's just too much money. So people who are doing it because they love it. But some of the obstacles to mounting an adventure race are obviously, it's by its very nature being adventure, it's an unpredictable sport. You don't have a set course, you don't have a set route. So insurance companies can be very reluctant to insure, or they charge a very high premium. So that raises costs dramatically. And also you have to normally for a formal adventure race, you have missions to stage a race, and that can cost a lot of money as well. So getting the permits, getting the insurance are big obstacles compared to something as predictable and as straightforward to organize as a triathlon. I'm being serious there, or an ultra run, or even a 10K run. Those things are really predictable, and you can have marshals and you can manage it easily.
People know what that is, right? Like they have a frame of reference for what a run or a triathlon is.
Yeah. So I have for some years, I've always been, in getting people into the sport, I've staged events for my friends and my team, because for anybody who's interested in adventure racing, it's one thing to go out and when you're running and you're biking and you're kayaking, obviously you got to do that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. But what's more educational is if you compete against other people, because that pushes you. I mean, even if you don't have the luxury of competing against other teams, at the very least, going out with your teammates, if you can, and experiencing adversity and, training together, not just on your own, is obviously going to be beneficial. But then if you train against other teams who also want to get training in, you bring that element of competitiveness in, which is really, really helpful, because it's under the pressure of competition that you're likely to make mistakes, that things are going to go wrong. If it's just you and your team doing something and then you all feel tired or sad or whatever it is, you can say, let's go home. But if you're competing, it's a different thing. So I organized one last July, 2021, and I just to keep it so I wouldn't get sued, to be blunt. I kept it invitation only. I mean, I outlined this in the whole episode, so I don't have to go into too much detail, but I kept it very contained. I got everybody to understand what they were going to be doing, so there was no misunderstandings. There's no way somebody could say, Adam, please help me. We put responsibility in the hands of every individual. And that's kind of interesting, because the birth of racing back in the 70s, those very, very first races were of exactly the same nature. I think one of the very first was in Alaska, where a bunch of people said, let's cross Alaska, or I don't know, it was crossing the whole state. But the point is, they said, let's get from A to B, get there however there wasn't a fixed discipline, but the first person or team to get to the other side is going to win. So there was no organizer, there was no race director, there was no money, there was nothing. So we're literally doing things in the same spirit. And, staged the event in July. We had, for the most part, people who were experienced teams, were experienced racers, but there were a bunch, a small percentage, and it wasn't a big field anyway, but there were a number of people who had never done adventure racing before, had never heard of it before even, and yet at the end of the 24 hours that we did, and it was some really tough terrain. It was the hottest day of the year, coincidentally. I mean, it was scorching hot. We had people who were broken, but have subsequently said, yes, please, when's the next one? And that was amazing, you know. So it gave me a great kick to see people come into the sport. It was tough. You know, some of my teammates who have been doing it the same length of time as myself said, wow, we couldn't believe the richness of that experience. So, you know, you don't have to rely on living in a place where lots of activities happening. I know some states in the US and maybe areas of Canada, you know, rich racing community. But as you're doing, Chris, you know, you found a place, you're passionate about racing, and you want to start a community in that area, and that's awesome. You know, it can only grow. And as we know, you know, especially COVID and all that kind of stuff, there's more demand than ever from people just wanting to get out and experience things and enjoy, you know, nature and all that kind of stuff. And adventure racing does it best. So yeah, that's a summary of why and how, and the response has been awesome. And just I did it in July. I told just on the back of what I'd done, and this is before I showed the episode on AR and AR, the UK adventure racing community, people who I had invited but hadn't been able to make it, saw the photographs that I showed afterwards. And I had 3 sets of people contact me. And as a consequence, 2021 saw my single race, 24-hour race. 2022 is going to see 3 to 4 24-hour races of the same nature. So, I mean, that's like, woohoo, you know, people are going, yeah, let's do this. Let's do it properly, you know, with trackers and maps and the whole caboodle. So I'm really excited, you know, what the future holds.
It's awesome. And you're absolutely right. So there's a whole bunch there to unpack. So COVID is obviously a huge issue, especially for, you know, depending on the climates and where you are in the world, bringing people together in person is quite challenging. And that was one thing for us, especially starting a race, is like it's quite hard to bring everybody together or risk trying to bring everybody together on the onset, especially as a new organization. That we, you know, there's a bit of fear of like, well, if we stage this in-person race and it can't go, you know, that's not the best for us starting out. Yeah. So it very much was the same idea. The concept for us is a little bit different in the sense that we're going to do a staged race. So there's 3 separate stages that folks are going to do on their own time, and they'll be able to do over a period of time. So they'll have 3 weeks to complete each of the 3 stages. We'll use Strava as a way to confirm, you know, grossly confirm that they've made it to the checkpoints, but then also, you know, a control card is still in play, fixed checkpoints, similar that you shared on AR. You know, what's the date on this particular plaque at this checkpoint? They have to confirm that they've been there. So yeah, quite similar, which is, you know, which is awesome. I'm just trying to think of some other things that you had mentioned. It's just, it is fascinating. I guarantee you, since you've published that episode on AR and conversations that are happening, we're going to see these type of events. So the fact that you know of a handful already for the next season, guarantee you we'll see some. We have some in the works as well. And we have two race announcements coming up that we're going to make at the end of this race in the end of February. Pretty excited about that, but sure, I think you're going to see a lot of others start to use the same concepts. Shoulder season training, like it's just you know, if you're putting a lot of effort into an in-person event, it's still just as much effort in some respects to create this style of race. But like you had said on your episode as well, once you have all these checkpoints, you can use them again in future years in different capacities. So, and the other thing real quick for those listening, because I did chuckle in terms of you not wanting to be sued. We still have insurance for our races because obviously the formal race, it's not invite only. But you're right about permitting as well. We inquired formally about permitting, and because there's no fixed, we're not fixing anything or affixing anything to you know, anywhere in the space. Formal permits aren't required for this type of race yet. If they become more common, that might change, obviously, but we're quite fortunate where we are. So it's fascinating. I think you're right. I think we're going to start seeing more of these events over time.
Yeah, I mean, because it's you know, no matter, we've seen recently in adventure racing circles that people trying to coordinate and grow the sport from like a federation point of view, from the top down. And I think it's pretty much like triathlon. I knew what triathlon was, but it got off the ground from grassroots community type stuff, non-profit stuff, schools getting involved and everything. And there's one of my passions is getting young people into it. I mean, for many reasons. We all know, getting kids away from screens. I have three boys. They're all in their mid to late teens. One's in his early 20s. So for me as a parent, getting my kids outdoor, capable, experienced, being able to, one of the things I used to do with my kids when they were young, I mean, this is before they were teenagers, I'd take them 10 miles away and drop them with a compass and a map and say, walk home, across military and all that kind of stuff. And, I wasn't irresponsible. They loved it, that few times. And it took that kind of thing for other parents to go, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that, It's building resilience, all that kind of stuff. And it's in a lot of countries, especially countries where people like to get outdoors, and that's, Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, those kind of places, there's a big thirst for this kind of stuff. And we've seen that, and the fact that Bear Grylls hosted Eco Challenge Fiji, there's so many people who follow a figure like that because of their thirst for adventure. And kids are so inspired. I mean, there's a reason he's the head of scouting. I think he still is the head of the scouting movement globally. It's because kids love adventure, even if they don't think they want it. They do. And it just takes somebody to kind of encourage them to like, hey, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And build that self-confidence and all sorts of things. We just know it's all good.
I've said for a while, like we all come for the adventure. The racing part is secondary. And obviously there's, the type 2 fun and the challenge of the racing for sure. But the primary reason that we're there is all for the adventure.
Yeah.
I'm also fascinated because in different parts of the world, and I think you have a little bit more experience of this, is schools that are getting into the education system, getting into adventure racing. I work in the education system. I think it would be fascinating to see. Certainly doesn't exist around here right now, but perhaps there are other, parts of our country that it does exist. Are you familiar with that a bit more, or were you part of that?
New Zealand is the leader in doing this at a school level, and They have an annual championship called the Hillary Challenge, if anybody wants to look it up, which is incredible. I mean, and that is why New Zealand, with such a small population, are the #1 adventure race in the world. Yeah. And they have a total population of 5 million or something ludicrously small. Australia has had something in the way of a school series. South Africa had a national series at school level. I don't know if it still persists. There are schools, though, not necessarily on a national, but there are certainly schools who do this whole kind of thing. France is big in it. Spain has a very healthy adventure racing community. It's massive. I know that Canada was looking into it because when I was trying to contact various organizations globally, this is a couple of years ago, about schools pre-COVID, I remember coming across talk about Canada trying to set something up. And I don't know who, I don't know what, I could go back and look at this. But people are concerned that adventure racing tends to appeal to an older generation, especially the costs of adventure racing. But it doesn't have to be such a barrier to entry. And people are concerned that once the current crop of adventure racers maybe get too old and move on, where's the fresh blood going to come from? And the challenge, the recent Eco Challenge, has inspired people, no doubt. It has brought a fresh audience. But if we're talking about the older generation of adventure racers, they had years and years and years of solid television coverage.
Totally.
That global perception of this incredible sport. And we've only got like one in 2019 on Amazon Prime. But, who else is picking up the sport? Who knows? We've got to be optimistic. As you were saying, I just want to mention, you said we come for the adventure and the racing is secondary. I was thinking about it the other day. I race because of the adventure, but I train because of the racing. That's why they're so important. That if it wasn't for the racing, we wouldn't be driven to train so hard. Yeah, it's a competitive element.
That's a valid point. When you think about grassroots, I got two young daughters as well. And my youngest daughter, one of her birthdays that she still talks about often was an adventure running birthday party that I'd set up. And it was an aerial photo that I took from, from Google. I dropped on some checkpoints, different parts of the park that they were in, hugged some old markers, created a small little control cart, and I gave all these kids, and pretty quickly they learned how to orient this aerial photo, and they're like, oh, and I still have video of it. And I just think it's fascinating that they still talk about that experience. And and I think there is a movement. When I first started racing a number of years ago, certainly, at least in Canada, it wasn't as visible, but now there's more of a movement where races are starting to either have stages or categories for families, which I think is fascinating and important for growing the sport. Obviously, much shorter. The disciplines are much more achievable for younger families or younger folks. But it is a step forward to growing the sport.
Yeah, I mean, in South Africa, they have racing for kids as young as 7 years old. It's like crazy. And they have very strong family series of races, 5 kilometers in total. So like, the kayaking is 1 or 2K, and the biking is maybe 12K, and the trek is 10K. I mean, anybody can do that, and I know that there are, I mean, we can talk about this afterwards, but I know of a couple of people that Randy has interviewed who are equally passionate about it, who are who building templates for the school level type stuff or the youth level type stuff, and want to share that free, then we get more people to do this. And they just built that spontaneously on the back of, I want to get kids involved, and then parents going, oh wow, that's amazing, I want my kids to be involved, and it grows and grows. And then on top of that, I mean, one of the things to consider is to make it safe for the kids, is that one allows kids to compete only if they're competing with their parents. So that's much easier from the insurance point of view, because the parent is supervising their child. But the second, you fostering the parent-child relationship, because not only are they going to race together, which is awesome, and an incredible experience, but also they would train together. So there would be time pre-race that the parent with the child is going to be spending time, quality time together, and then the race is just the pinnacle. So relationship building is critical. I mean, for me, that is something I'm very passionate about.
There's huge positive health outcomes with not just the physical piece, but that the relationship piece, the positive mental well-being for the children and for the adults.
Yeah, totally.
And that was part of the for our Arctic Fox Winter Stage race. Part of the reason was we're all struggling at some level, at some degree, and to have a goal to train towards. For me, it was a goal to actually organize. I think that's positive, and if we can instill that in our own children, our youth, it's a huge step. So it's great.
Yeah. I mean, literally one of the reasons I race is because I need those goals. Right from the first involvement in adventure racing was, if I put the goal on the calendar, then I will train. But without it, it is harder. It is definitely harder. And if I'm in a team, then you're bringing in that element of accountability. I have to be accountable to the team. I can't let the team down. I've got to contribute. Otherwise, on race day, the team's going to fall apart because I'm the weak link.
Totally.
So it's so good. It's so good. If it was a solo sport, it wouldn't be nearly as powerful as it is, because it's a relationship-based sport.
Totally. A couple takeaways here, and I think we can wrap up. One is for folks listening and watching, is to check out AR on YouTube. Absolutely. As well, Randy Erickson's podcast that you were in, but also a whole bunch. I think you were episode 310. So there is a lot of time for listening, which is fantastic. These types of races, in terms of whether they're formal or just training events, invite only, there's some possibilities. So definitely check out more information from us, but also the information you provided in depth is also great for our participants, because they'll have a bit of an insight into what they're getting towards or getting themselves into. Last thing I want to ask you, and I tend to ask folks just before we end, especially expedition length racers, are sleep monsters, and your encounters with sleep monsters and any memorable moments that you have. I'm sure,
yes,
the amount of racing that you've had, you probably have lots. Are there any that you
Yeah.
to share with us?
I mean, I think it's one of the biggest, one of the things people face with trepidation when they're new to adventure racing is they've heard about these hallucinations you experience, which are known commonly as sleep monsters, due to a combination of extreme fatigue and sleep deprivation. Most of the time, that's not going to happen, in my experience anyway, until you way past the 24-hour stage. You start talking multi-day racing. In a nutshell, it's nothing to be worried about.
Absolutely.
It's it's amusing, if more than anything else. And you know, there's a few stories I have, but one of them that just shows you how silly it can be. I was in a multi-day race in Eastern Europe. I was being towed. I'd had some sort of not heat stroke, but heat exhaustion. Anyway, so I was out of shape. It was about 36 hours into the race, and yeah, even more, closer to 40, I don't know, whatever. And I was being towed by a teammate. There were 4 of us in the team, and we were going on a tarmac road, and I didn't need to keep my eyes open, really. So I'm on a being towed by my friend who's marching ahead, and he's a big, strong guy, very, very huge endurance. Anyway, and the feeling, if you're towing somebody who's barely functioning, is the person being towed tends to sway a bit, because you're just keeping one foot moving in front of the other. So he said it was like towing a drunken caravan behind him. And as he was towing me, and I'm just like, my eyes are shut most of the time, there was a road sign on the side of the road. And he didn't know, because he's marching ahead. And I went face first into this road sign. It smacked me. And the first thing he heard was this loud bang. He turns around, and I'm on the floor. I was fine. The point is, I was so relaxed, I was out of it, but it was like, wow, that was so funny. And he thought it was pretty funny in hindsight, but he was a bit worried for me in a few seconds. My point is, don't worry about this kind of stuff. It's going to happen. And when it happens, you'll laugh about it and you'll see strange things. I've never heard of anybody seeing anything terrifying.
No.
I don't know anybody who's anything terrifying. It's been bizarre. I see a lot of people empathize with this, I'm sure, from a racing perspective, where they see the shadows morph into strange shapes. And I see gargoyles and toads and monsters, but it's all fun. I mean, I'm laughing because I know what's happening. It's like conscious hallucination, as in, it's not a dream, but it's almost dreamlike.
I do appreciate.
Don't be worried about it. It's just, of course,
I appreciate setting the context for that, because you're right. You're absolutely. If you're doing a sprint race, something that's within daylight hours, so to speak, or if it's 8 to 9 hours, very highly unlikely that you're going to get to that point. But it is usually when you're multi-day racing, probably your second night of having no sleep. And I laugh because when you talk about very abstract, I still remember being down in Colorado at a race, and I saw an elephant on the back of a monkey sitting on a tiny little rock. And it was the most confusing thing ever, especially to my teammates, when I try to explain to them that, take a look at this. And then you realize pretty quick that you're like, oh, wait a minute, never mind. I just need to shake myself awake. So
yeah. And everybody does it, and at different times. It's unlikely you'd feel at the same time as somebody else in your team.
Totally.
And you just, oh, well, they're off. It's almost, they're on a trip somewhere.
Yeah.
If you want to experience it for yourself, anybody who's listening, finish on a Friday night, finish on Friday afternoon, whatever job you do, and then start a 24-hour exercise at midnight. So there's no sleep up until you've had a full day of work, and then go out and race from midnight to midnight the following. You're likely to bring it on. That's what my team have done many times.
It's fun to talk about it and share. And you're right. In hindsight, it's more amusing. It's something to look back on and reflect, but nothing to be worried about for anybody for that matter. So, hey, thanks very much for taking the time with us. It's a pleasure to reach out and to make a connection, build a relationship. Definitely encourage folks to check out your channel. And I think maybe we might have to task ourselves to come back and talk about adventure racing and getting kids and schools involved. I think there's definitely some opportunity there, and I'd love to know who in Canada might be looking at that, because certainly a worthwhile conversation. So Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. No, good. Got a
Awesome.
good community.
Well, we just lost you. So the timing, I think, works out quite well.
No, well, it wasn't, but I have to
It's all-
keep. Yeah, sorry.
It's all good. Thanks so much, Adam. We'll definitely keep talking.